In the case of the Philippines, the US has long been a colonial power there, and its location in the South China Sea makes the Philippines potentially a strategic asset for US's military interests in the region. In February 2023, the US announced 4 new military sites in the Philippines, bringing the total to 9 official US sites. In the words famously attributed to Henry Kissinger, it may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal. What is your assessment of the Philippines' foreign policy position under its current president, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr.?
Oh, that's very good. And it's a very interesting question. And I think this is very important as well, not only for my country, but of course for the global community, especially for Asia Pacific. When you talk about the foreign policy of the current administration of Bongbong Marcos, my assessment, and I've been vocal about this, I have written many things about this, is it is a foreign policy that's very much leaning to the United States and very much influenced by the United States. How would I account for that? And what are the manifestation of this? As you mentioned earlier, there are 5 existing EDCA bases / US bases in the country. Now it's 9. And these EDCA bases are located in strategic areas. When I say strategic areas and sensitive areas, I would refer to some of them are near and facing the South China Sea, and some of them are near and facing Taiwan. As we can see, the Taiwan Strait is a very sensitive area and a very volatile area in many ways. Because if you look at the Taiwan Strait, of course, you have China in there. And because of the one China policy, many countries in the world, a majority, I think, member states of the United Nations, acknowledge that Taiwan is part of China. It's undisputable part of China. But of course, if you look at Taiwan, there are elements of trying to advocate for independence, and they want Taiwan to be as a country, as an independent state. But of course, China will never agree to that. But you have these elements that somewhat in many ways are being supported, though the United States is claiming that they adhere to the one China policy, but there are many signs that it supports to a certain extent this kind of secessionist movement or secessionist elements in Taiwan. So you can see that in Taiwan, there's a lot of purchasing of military assets from the United States. And of course, China is very much uncomfortable about all of these things, and China was not happy about all of these things. On the other hand, how it relates to the Philippines. Of course, it relates to the Philippines at the moment, especially under President Marcos Jr., precisely because the additional EDCA sites, the 4 additional EDCA sites, majority of these US bases are located very near Taiwan. So if in any case a military breakout in Taiwan Strait, definitely the Philippines will be used by the United States in that kind of conflict. So of course, as a country, we will be compromised in many ways because the first country that would receive the retaliation from China is the Philippines, precisely because of the military installations of the United States in my country. And these are controlled by the US troops. It's not because they are there that we control it as a country. No, it's still being controlled by the United States, an extension of the United States, some kind of domestic control. On the other hand, another important case which affects the region at the moment is the South China Sea. Though the South China Sea, there are many claimant states in the South China Sea. It's a disputed area. You have China, which is the biggest countries thus far. You have Vietnam, you have Brunei, and you have Malaysia and the Philippines. But if you really look at the other claimant states, they have a very functional and very kind of cooperative understanding with China. So in terms of tension, it's very low. But between the Philippines and China at the moment, under President Marcos Jr., its tension is heightened, it's intensified and escalated to a greater extent, precisely because the Philippines is being used by the United States as a proxy or a pawn against China, but using the South China Sea as the issue. In the very first place, I don't really understand why the United States is interfering in this issue, that it is not a party to the conflict. The conflict is among Southeast Asian claimant states and China. So it's not the party to the conflict. Second is it's using UNCLOS, the United Convention on the Law of the Sea, as against China using the Philippines, but it's not even a signatory to UNCLOS. So in many ways, that's very hypocritical for the United States to have that kind of stand. But at the end of the day, the reality at the moment, given the foreign policy of our current government, which is very leaning to the United States, very heavily influenced the United States, a foreign policy that is militarized against China, and the approach to the South China Sea is belligerent in many ways. two country. It's escalating, and every now and then it provokes some kind of tension in the region to a greater extent, because ASEAN countries, our ASEAN friends who are part of ASEAN, as the Philippines is part of ASEAN, are not happy about it. So that's just one thing, though, Fiona and Liana. The other thing that is recent more is the deployment of the Typhoon missile system in my country. That system is an American asset that was deployed in the last Balikatan Earth exercises, and it's deployed in the northern part of the Philippines. This Typhoon missile system is somewhat not good for my country, not good for the region. I would explain a little later why, but the most important right now is China and Russia are reacting, and they're saying that this missile system should be removed from the Asia Pacific region. Thus, it should be removed from the Philippines. But it seems that the schedule of removal of this Typhoon missile system should be September of this year, but until now it's there. And now our armed forces have announced that it plans to buy missiles to feed this Typhoon missile system. But the question is, why would we have this kind of military asset, and why the Americans are building? They have this military buildup, and the country that they're using for this military buildup is the Philippines. What's the reason for this? As far as I'm concerned, I'm a Filipino. I don't think we have an enemy. I don't think China is our enemy. It's our largest trading partner. So the question really is, why is it that America, or the United States for that matter, is building its arms in the Asia Pacific region? And the military buildup, one of the countries that they're using at the moment is my country, the Philippines. And it's not only China that is reacting at the moment, but you have Russia. So with this kind of foreign policy of the current administration of Bongbong Marcos, it seems that my country is creating an enemy instead of friends out of Russia and out of China. And look, this is Russia and China. These are military superpowers. If the United States is a superpower, these two are also military superpowers. So this foreign policy really will not benefit the Philippines in many ways. It's benefiting the United States precisely because these are very much influenced by the United States, and this is more on the agenda of the United States. And what is the agenda of the United States in the Asia Pacific region? There's two things: to preserve its hegemony. Second is what's so-called freedom of navigation, which is not about commercial boats, but a freedom of navigation in the South China Sea for warships to pass through without qualms or without even permission or anything. It's like the king of the South China Sea, of that sea. So their warship can just pass through anytime they want without, countries in Southeast Asia will not say anything. But that should not be the case. That is one of their justification. And another thing I think is there is this discussion even among geopolitical experts that America is preparing that so-called war against China when the time comes. So now they're having this military buildup, which I would pray that it will never happen, because war is not good for anyone, for any country for that matter, and no one wins in a war. So this is now the real situation. And so if I would be asked if I agree with the foreign policy of my country, of course I don't, because I believe that a country like the Philippines, small, we're not as wealthy as other countries, we're not even as wealthy as Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore, is to have a balanced foreign policy. Balanced foreign policy that is centered on our national interest of a country, that will not compromise our independence, our autonomy, and our sovereignty as a country, and we can make decisions on our own without being dictated by any superpower or any country for that matter. However, that is not the case right now in my country. As you can see, I feel that we are like a semi-colonial, as I feel that we are going back to the colonial period where the Philippines was a colony of the United States. I feel that, they don't have the physical presence in many ways in terms of physical manifestation of that colonization, but in terms of influence, in terms of our foreign policy, even our domestic politics, is very much felt in the ground, very much felt by the BBM administration allows it precisely because I think he thinks that his survival, politically speaking, in domestic politics depends on the backing of the United States. So, there are, of course, exchanges to this. So that's pretty much the picture of my country at the moment when you talk about foreign policy under a Marcos Jr. administration.